All right, we are starting a series today. We're going into basically finishing up the year. And we are, as was mentioned before with the candle, we are in the midst of Advent season, which is the season of time that leads up to the birth of Christ, the celebration of Christmas. And so we're going to spend the next couple of weeks exploring some different passages that lead into this season of time. And what we're calling the series is the weary world rejoices. And to which I think all of us, and by the way, I don't mind telling you, that was Ashley's idea. And when she said it, I thought like, oh, that's exactly right. Because who among us can identify with some level of weariness right now, right? Even if it's just like my kids are so busy and there's so much going on, or if it's a deeper sort of like bone level, like I can't believe the motor is even still running at all. You know what I mean? And so we are in the midst of probably a lot of that. And for a lot of people, this season of time is like we're winding down the year, we're closing up like budget stuff or whatever. But for a lot of us, like I said before, December is the busiest month we've got. And so many of us, like it's only December the 7th and we're already exhausted. So like this notion of weariness, like this is a real, I think, thing that sort of exists in our time and in our place. And so we're gonna dig into this idea for the next few weeks. And we're gonna use these Advent readings as kind of a jumping off point. So now I grew up in a Baptist church, which means we did not do like church calendar stuff a lot. So ideas like Advent and Lent and things like that, like church calendar, liturgical types of things, I didn't learn about it until I went to college, and I had friends who had grown up in different traditions, and I started studying like religious studies and started learning like, oh, there's all sorts of other traditions that I never knew about. And Advent was one of those things. And as part of Advent, which we just heard about, there is each week, not only are there different passages that are pointed to, there are also like specific words that we are invited to reflect upon. And this week, as was mentioned a second ago, the word is peace. And this won't surprise you at all. I've never had a great relationship with peace. Peace and I have been uncomfortable with one another from the very beginning. I am very naturally a pretty anxious person. The notion of some like internal like Zen or peace or whatever, like that is a thing I have to try really hard for. And the harder I try, the more stressed out I get that I'm not feeling peaceful enough. I don't know if you can identify with that. And I remember, it's funny, like the passage we're going to be looking at, and this comes from a document called, or a resource called the Lectionary. And the Lectionary, again, a thing I learned later than probably a lot of my peers, is that the Lectionary is this resource of different passages for people, basically assigning different passages for pastors, teachers, preachers to preach throughout the year. And so what we are looking at today, we're looking at a passage lifted out of the Lectionary, which means there are probably tens of thousands of other churches today all over the world looking at the same passage, which is sort of this reminder of, oh, the story is so much bigger than what we do for an hour a week. So, and I remember the first time I ever preached out of this passage, it was actually this exact week of Advent 9 years ago. And I wasn't supposed to preach this week. I was pastoring a church, but I had asked a friend of mine from seminary to come in and preach this particular week. And at 3:00 in the morning, Saturday night / Sunday morning, I get a text message from my friend, and she says, "I'm so sorry. I have the worst case of food poisoning. I cannot preach in the morning." It's 3:00 in the morning. We have to have service in, say, like 5 hours. And so now I'm awake, and I have to like get up, and I haven't even looked because I didn't think I would need to. And so I looked through the Lectionary, and I find out that this is the passage. This is the key word is peace. So I am sitting in my home office at 3:00 in the morning, like with a ticking clock on my wall, red-eyed, I'm stressed out, and I've got 3 hours to write a whole sermon about peace. And so I'm trying really hard to like channel whatever part of me that understands anything about peace, because I'm not feeling it at the moment. And so I started just sort of reading through it. And I'm not going to lie, the first couple of times I read through this passage, I thought this has nothing to do with peace. This is a misdirect. What are they even doing? And so this passage in Isaiah 11, and I actually have an odd history because that's the first time I ever even considered it. So in Isaiah 11, so we're just going to look at it and just you try and ask yourself, if I was woken up at 3:00 in the morning and had 3 hours to write a sermon about peace, what would I say? Because that's how this whole journey began. So in Isaiah 11, beginning in verse 1, It says this. It says, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of knowledge and fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. Are you with me so far? Are you getting a peace vibe off of this so far? So I remember sitting in my office at 3 a.m. trying to figure out, what does this have to do with, like, how in the world does this have anything to do with peace at all? And because I was hoping for something a lot more straightforward, to be honest with you. I was hoping for something like the Lord is our shepherd, you know what I mean? Or something about like God setting our souls to rest or leading us beside still waters. I was hoping for a very clear, easy, straightforward picture. I could just like put a couple of stories around it and then be done, and no one would ever know that this whole thing was thrown together with like duct tape and shoestring. And so I remember sitting there and looking at this passage thinking like, I don't even know what to do with this. But then the more I thought about it and the more I continued to read, I realized, oh, this passage actually is about peace. It's just not the kind of peace that I was expecting it to be about. Because again, I have a 21st century Western American notion of all of these ideas. And so when I think of peace, I think of calm. I think of like a lack of interpersonal conflict. Like I don't think of anything that maybe people thousands of years ago might have thought of when they first read this passage. And so this passage is about peace, but I was just being a little bit too, honestly, 21st century American to really see it at face value. And so a helpful thing to do when looking at passages like this is to put ourselves in the mindset of the person who's writing it in the first place, which is not easy to do all the time. And so what Isaiah here is he's writing to people who are living in a state of exile. And what I mean by that is not long before this passage was written, the city of Jerusalem, which is where this group of people had been living for a long time, their home, where their temple and their families and their businesses were, had been raided and destroyed by the Babylonian Empire. And anyone who wasn't killed or left for dead was taken hostage and carried back to Babylon, basically to live out the rest of their lives as captives. And eventually, the idea was, this group of people will serve our empire for as long as they can, and then they'll die out, and then there will be no more of this people. So basically, exile is basically the end of the road for lots of people in this time and in this place. If your city, country, nationality, group of people, if you've been exiled, that basically indicates, oh, your story is over. And so that is where Isaiah is, and that's who he's writing to, and that's what he's writing. That is a mental place that he's writing from. So Isaiah is writing far from his own homeland, detached from cultural identity, and he's writing to and about people in this situation who would have understandably been expected to assume that they had been basically abandoned and forgotten by God. Once we die, that's the end of our story. And so Isaiah is trying to tell them, look, I know it doesn't look like this. I know it doesn't feel like this, but we actually will survive this. This terror, this violence that we are currently experiencing doesn't have to be the final word of our story, and it won't be the final word of our story. In fact, this in verse 1, it talks about the root of Jesse. And if you keep going through this passage, in verse 10, he reiterates the root of Jesse. He uses this phrase a couple of times. Jesse is a way of talking about the family line of a king named David. Jesse was actually David's father. And David is often sort of seen as like the apex of, this is the best we've ever been as a people. And so when he talks about the root of Jesse, he's calling back to like this king that basically, in a lot of ways, defined the very best of who we could be. And so he's saying, coming from the root of Jesse, we're calling back to this king we had named David, whose descendants were the kings of Israel up until the exile began. And so with that understanding, we now had this sort of notion of, okay, so when Isaiah talks about the root of Jesse, he's talking about the entire family line that seemed to have ended when our temple was destroyed, our people were killed, because by the way, the king also was killed. And so it becomes like, okay, well, who's the root of Jesse if the king is dead? And so in Isaiah chapter 11, so let's go back to verse 1 and take a look again. He says, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. from his root, a branch will bear fruit. So the image here is very descriptive, is it not? So you have this image, this mental picture of an old dead tree stump, and a word that declares that new life will break out from within the tree stump. So you have like a dead tree stump is basically like that's the end of that tree, is it not? Like you don't expect new trees to come up from out of the dead tree stump. So what the writer here is saying is like, oh no, it looks like a dead tree stump, but it turns out there's still life brewing just below the surface. So we have this image that reflects death, which is the tree stump, but we also have something else that's filled with new life that emerges out of it. And so I don't know if you can see this, but an image of a tree stump with some sort of new green, fresh life emerging out of what seems to be dead and gone. So the word shoot here in Hebrew is actually the word netzer in Hebrew, and it also translates as branch. Which in Hebrew literature, quite often the word branch is often used as a metaphor to talk about someone's descendants. So it's not just like, so he's using a metaphor of a dead tree stump and a live branch that's coming out of the dead tree stump, but he's also calling back to a larger cultural assumption, which is a branch isn't just a thing that grows on a tree. A branch is a metaphor that we often use, or a word picture that we often use to talk about a family line. So in Hebrew literature, branch is often used to talk about someone's descendants. So here's why this is important. When this group of people's home is destroyed and they're taken into exile, the assumption is, this is the end of their story. The assumption is once we're dead, that's the end of the Hebrew people. And now this writer, Isaiah, is insisting not only is this line not done, not only will this line not live on, but also at some point there will be some kind of new unlikely life that bursts out of what appears to be a dead tree stump. So this isn't simply about individualized peace, because again, that's when I was 9 years ago, when I'm sitting in my office at 3 a.m, I'm trying to figure out like, how does this get to like me feeling more calm in my life? But apparently that's not what this is really about. This is about something bigger. This isn't simply about some sort of individualized peace where I learn like breathing exercises, which can be very helpful, by the way, but that's not what he's actually getting at. It's about a societal peace. It's about a collective notion of peace. It's not just like, I feel better. It is, let me tell you something that's going to give you a sense of we still have a future. And maybe that will give us some sort of peace. A peace that is meant to span the delta between generations and the delta between different economic classes and even political ideologies. This is a peace that is meant to give life to the next chapter of the story. So if we take a step back from this and we just sort of like look internally, not just at ourselves, but again at the world and the situation around us, do you ever feel like maybe we're the stump? You know, do you ever wonder if your best days are behind you? Do you ever feel like whatever energy or passion you once had has kind of slipped through your fingers? Do you feel like you've run out of faith or hope or love? Do you feel like you're just kind of beaten down and crushed down, and like whatever notion of future or hope or dreams that I once had, those are long gone, and now I'm just sort of existing in this cyclical kind of like time loop of like, well, I guess it's Christmas again, you know. I do. I mean, not to make it too bleak, but I get it. I'm very familiar with that feeling. I definitely have had seasons in my life when I felt more like the stump than the tree branch. Like feeling the feeling of being exhausted, feeling of being beaten down, being drained of any sense of idealism or hope. As if my tank has gone all the way to empty. You know what I mean? And I've spent lots of time pouring myself into things, and then like leading a church, and then kind of taking a step back from it and kind of quietly wondering, like, did any of that matter at all? You know, I was actually just sharing with Charlie before the service started. Before we moved to Oklahoma, which was about 3 years ago, I had pastored a church for about 8 years, and left that church. Just like the church was basically dying, and I needed to find a way we needed to find a way to keep our family from not having to starve to death, honestly. And so we moved to Oklahoma because that was where the most viable job opportunity was for me that wasn't in a church. And so I left this church in 2020, in January of 22, and that was the last time I preached a sermon there. And I fully believed when we left the parking lot that day, I thought I just preached my last sermon. Like, I'm done. Like, this is I did. I mean, all told, it was about 20 years and a lot of like money and time spent on education and books. Like, what am I going to do with all these books now? And so, like, there was sort of this notion of, like, that whole part of my life, that chapter is closed. And so it sort of became like, okay, well, now my job is to just kind of exist and to just sort of do my best to feed my family and to take care of the people that I'm responsible for as best I can. And that's going to have to be as good as it gets. And so, obviously, not like me in my best place. And so we came here, and Caroline even asked me. She said, like, and I've talked about this before, but the question of, like, where are we going to go to church when we move to Edmond? And I was like, we're not going to find a church. Are you crazy? Like, where in Edmond could we go to church? And we found the well so fast, and it became such a source of life. And then after we'd been here for a while, when the elders asked me if I'd be interested in preaching a little bit just to fill in, which at this point it's gotten a lot more serious than that. But just the invitation to do this again, this thing that I thought was dead, honestly. And I mean, this is not how I earn a living anymore. Which is fine. And because that comes with its own, like, level of stress, but that I get to do this. Like, again, I thought that part of my life was a dead tree stump, and then thanks to the well and a lot of the people here, it turns out there was life still there. There was a branch that was waiting to grow out of it. And so I don't know if you've been in that place before or not, but you're certainly not alone. And it's a very old story. And Isaiah is writing to a group of people who were in that spot, like, not just individually, but as a society. Like, who are we anymore? Like, we've lost our cultural identity. We've lost our home. We've lost our friends. We've lost our family members in a lot of cases. Who are we anymore? The tree stump is fully dead. And Isaiah is like, no, take another look. There might be a little bit of life still left in there. But again, like, to turn it around, it isn't always that way, right? Sometimes there are also times when I feel like the shoot, like the life coming out of the tree stump. I feel energized, hopeful, optimistic about the future. I imagine a lot of us can relate to the stump and the shoot, just depending on the day, right? Like, some days we wake up and it's like, oh my gosh, really? It's still December. And then some of us are like, oh wow, what a gift it is to be alive. And it probably, you might have certain days where you feel each thing half a dozen times. And so we live in sort of this tension between the stump and the shoot. And Isaiah is saying, don't let the stump fool you, because that's not the final word of your story. And the thing is, it goes back to the title of the series, right? A weary world rejoices. I think a lot of people are weary. I think often we find ourselves living in a very weary world. And this passage in Isaiah is about being filled with death and exhaustion and losing the will to move the needle at all. And then some kind of new life bursts forth out of that situation. And then, by the way, later on, if you take a look at the book of Luke, which is part of the Christmas story, later on at the beginning of the story of Jesus in the book of Luke, just before the birth of Jesus, we're given one specific detail about Jesus's human father, Joseph. In Luke chapter 2, verse 4, it says this. It says, so Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, to the town of David, because he belonged to the house in the line of David. So the writer very subtly calls back to Isaiah here, because not only has the line of Jesse, David's father, endured, somehow we're hundreds of years after the exile, and apparently the line of David has not ended. And so the next chapter of the story begins with someone from David's line going back to David's hometown, which is a town called Nazareth, which, by the way, there's a fun little detail here. The word, everybody okay? Sound like a bug zapper just went off. Okay, so by the way, the word descendant here, or remember earlier when it talks about descendant or branch, The Hebrew word for that is netzer. Now, lots of linguists believe that the word Nazareth, the town where Joseph lived, Nazareth is derived from the word netzer. So it's totally possible that Luke is, in a very subtle way here, using the name of Nazareth to call back to Isaiah 11, as if to say, like, the branch, as it turned out, is very much alive. So Isaiah unpacks a few other dimensions of this, and we do not have time to get into all of the different stuff that Isaiah gets into here. But we're going to look at one dimension in Isaiah. So we went up through verse 3. So let's jump down to verse 6. It says, so this is, again, Isaiah talking. He just used the image of the shoot and the stump. And this is what he says. He says, the wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and the little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear, their young will lie down together, the lion will eat straw like the ox, the infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord, and the waters cover the sea. So now you have sort of the more traditional notion of peace, right? So you have this, like, in situations in which you feel like people should be in danger, or like living life should be in danger, and there is no danger. And so in verse 10, it says, in that day, now going back to the same phrase, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. So Isaiah describes a situation in which not only is new life and new hope and peace restored, but peace is replacing hostility. Your enemies will become like your family. So as we move through the season, and as we engage with the Christmas narrative, we are invited to see part of our role here as people who work to bring peace where peace has been absent for a long time. It's not just there was death and now there's life, which is a huge part of the story. It's also, in what ways is there interpersonal death that I can breathe new life into? In what ways is there tension and conflict and hostility that maybe I can bring some amount of grace and peace into the world? Some of us will feel like the stump because it seems like nothing we do matters, because it seems like we've lost the will to try. Some of us will feel like the stump because there's so much tension in the world around us. And in fact, the word we often use here is polarization, right? Like, how many of us feel like we're weary because everybody seems at odds at all times? And it seems pointless to do anything to push against it, because why bother? If something could be done, something would have been done by now, is sort of the mentality, right? So some of us feel like the stump because it's like, what I do doesn't make any difference. Some of us feel like the stump because every time we're in a room full of people, it gets tense and it gets hostile, and it's like, well, there's this giant list of topics we just can't talk about because it will just, like, grandma will go off, and so we have to maintain, like, calm at the expense of being connected with one another. And so the story we're participating in is one in which people find new reasons to hope for what's next. And the story we're participating in is one in which we refuse to take part in pushing people further away from each other. So we talked about this before, but we stand around all the time and we lament things like, oh, we're so divided and we're so polarized. But are we actually doing anything to change the narrative? Are we sharing memes? Or, like, how many, like, I know people for sure who will sit around and talk about, like, oh, it's so, what a shame it is that we're so polarized, and then like cannot stop texting people memes about, like, how stupid and, like, broken the other side is. Are you with me? Like the call is coming from inside the house, my friend. Like, we need to be more aware of how we are actually participating in this. And so, like, or making snide remarks about people who don't see things the same way that we do. And so we lament the lack of peace, but we're doing nothing to make it more peaceful. We're doing nothing to bridge that gap, to bring life coming up out of the dead tree stump. So Christmas, this time of year, the celebration of the birth of Christ into the world, is when we celebrate new life bursting out of a dead stump. Not only that, it's a time when we're invited to ask ourselves, am I helping bring new life into the world around me? Am I bringing peace? Or am I contributing to the decay and the erosion of the peace that we are actually trying to foster, that we're invited to foster? I would imagine many of us woke up today feeling a lot like a stump, like there's no more life. But maybe some of us, we showed up today and it felt a lot more like the branch. Like maybe there is more life here. And maybe if we lean in and look for it and participate in it, we can actually make something good happen in this world. So if you are weary, if you feel like the dead stump, may you find new life and new peace as we journey towards the end of this year and the celebration of Christmas. May you engage with Christmas, not just like as a thing you've got to do to check off the list. May you engage Christmas as part of a story in which new life continues to insist on its existence. That where the dead stump is not the final word of the story. May you find peace and hope and grace in all the ways that new life might burst forth. May we all participate in bringing life into the world and bringing peace into the world. May we be, may we go looking for opportunities to participate in and celebrate the branch coming out of the dead stump.